in the upright position, Elizabeth, because we are zipping
Okay.
across the ether at the speed of bites. And hey, we did it again. Welcome to another episode of Creative on Purpose Live, conversations with insightful difference makers to inspire a life of greater intention and impact. I'm your host, Scott Perry, Chief Difference Maker at Creative on Purpose. If you're ready to get started, getting clearer and closer to what you really want in life and business, visit Creative on Purpose today. Let's meet our guest, Elizabeth Walker. Welcome to the broadcast. Please tell our viewers who you are, what you're up to these days, and where can people go to learn more about you and the difference that you're making.
Oh, hi. Thank you, Scott. My name is Elizabeth Walker, host and producer of the Dear Business Coach podcast. And you can visit dearbusinesscoachpodcast.com to connect with me there and select however you'd like to experience the show. And the Dear Business Coach podcast is new, and I'm sure you're going to ask me about that too, Scott.
Absolutely. Well, the first question before we get to the podcast and some of the things I know that you have coming up, I'm always just really interested in how people came to be doing the work that they're doing now. My guess is I didn't know you when you were 9 years old, but I knew you not too long after that. And I don't recall that you sharing with me that you had this big aspiration to be a podcast host. So what brought you into this realm and doing the work that you're doing now?
Well, to be honest with you, the podcast, it wasn't a mistake, but my first episode wasn't supposed to be a full episode on Spotify. I interviewed somebody for content for practice and decided to release it as an episode to see if I could publish it on Spotify. Would it sound good? Would it work? And then I just kept asking people to come and speak to me, and now it's called a podcast.
That's fantastic. Well, I love that because, oftentimes I think life is calling us to do, the things that life is calling us to do, and we're not always really paying a lot of attention. But if we have that ability to kind of be curious and to be willing to be playful and try things, like knowing that, we might not get it right the first time or it might not work the first time, sometimes we just kind of serendipitously, fall into that what's next that's kind of meant for us in our lives. So I love that your journey into podcasting was, number one, successful the first time out. I've been doing this long enough to remember how it used to be really, really hard to get your podcast anywhere and get people to hear it. So it's lovely that it's easier now and that you had some success out of the gate. Tell us a little bit about, now that you've been at it for a little while, what's the intended audience for your podcast, and what is it that you're hoping that your listeners take away from the conversations that you're hosting?
Sure. Well, the first goal of the Dear Business Coach podcast was to, as it sounds, Dear Business Coach sounds like a pen pal sort of format, right? And that's a lot of what it feels like for me. What if you had a friend who was a pen pal who is a business coach, and you just want to have a conversation, talk about, maybe where you need a shift and change in attitude for the day, or a little help seeing things a little bit differently. And then also, it's fun for me to listen to people's business journeys and ask them what they're up to, like what we're doing here today. So the goal of the Dear Business Coach podcast was for me to learn to ask experts and coaches and use that as an opportunity for me to ask questions. And now it's turning into a place where new entrepreneurs can use the podcast to explore what it feels like to be in an interview position. And that feeling that happens once you've done it once and you've had your first interview, oh my gosh, I was on a podcast. So now I'm finding that I really like talking to people who want a platform to experiment with being on a podcast and get practice, really. And it turns out that a lot of people who've never been on a podcast before have a lot of really insightful things to say. It's a fun place to have a casual conversation. And as the tagline on my LinkedIn banner and Facebook banner says, make a meaningful connection with your audience, that's what podcasting does. And so it turned from me learning from other experts to connecting with people who need and want a space to practice this art of talking to your audience.
Yeah, I love that. And, it's so interesting. We live in this age where everyone is trying to like be craft this image of themselves as being some sort of super uber professional public speaker, expert, authority in their domain type of thing. And uh, we forget sometimes about because there's so many tools available to us to come across as being extremely polished, and to have all the answers and all this sort of thing. What I am finding in my podcast, which doesn't sound that dissimilar from the kind of format that you're playing with, is that mostly people just want to hear authentic conversation, and hear people engaged in conversations that are based on an authentic connection, and kind of a collaborative conversation that is doesn't necessarily have an agenda behind it, and it's not something that's intended to be just kind of a thinly veiled sales pitch,
Mhm.
or that sort of thing. So it sounds like this format is really leveraging this idea of like human to human conversation. And I love the idea that you're also providing a platform for people to practice the art of sharing their expertise on this kind of platform. So I love all of that. What are some of the things that you see in the guests that you've had so far? Like, are there common themes, or are there, is there any kind of a silver thread or common theme, or common challenge, or common aspiration that the guests that you're interviewing, that's revealed through these conversations? Any kind of common topic or theme?
Yeah, specifically when, like you just said, people feel like they need to be polished. And even if my guest knows that it's okay to not be perfect, and I'm not perfect either, when I'm interviewing, I end up editing a lot of myself out. So when the guest comes onto the recording session with me, something happens in the first couple of questions where they realize I'm stumbling over my words too. I say all the time. I pause a lot. I look at my notebook a lot while I'm interviewing them, even though we're recording. And then a few minutes later, that guest is uh, a little bit relaxed. They know that they don't have to be reading a script, and find out that they want to start talking about the parts of their business that they enjoy every day. So now all of a sudden we've gotten away from what do we think we're supposed to be getting people to buy, or what's the tagline we want people to remember, which is important. But we get into some of those things like Stones Mayo. He's a musical artist that was on my podcast, and he had not done a podcast interview before, even though he was advertising online to sell his music to podcasters. And so he ended up telling me that he was really, really shy at the beginning of this interview. But then we spent 30 minutes talking about how his business works, how he loves helping people, how podcasting is a way for him to reach an audience that he can't do in his local area by himself. Same thing. I had another guest, Dr. Brianna Willie, who's a counselor. She and I met because she asked me to be on her podcast, and I said exactly what we're talking about here. I've actually never been interviewed myself, and well, maybe I should take her up on her offer because I need practice. And then I asked her to be on my podcast, and she said the same thing to me. Well, nobody's actually ever interviewed me. And now that interview of her for her business is on her website because it gave her an opportunity to talk about the pieces of her business that she loves so much, and she hadn't been able to answer those questions in an interview setting before.
Yeah, I love that. Well, I recognize that name because she's attended our event last Saturday and has been communicating back and forth by email since then. And it sounds like she's really doing fabulous work. So it's great that I'm sure that in some way, shape, or form, her coming to that event had something to do with her connection to you. So I appreciate that. Appreciate the difference that she's making. Um, what I also am hearing in your kind of story about getting over your own nervousness and and being a host and also inviting people that are kind of exploring this medium for the first time is that once you get people involved in talking about what excites them about
Mhm.
the work that they do or the difference that they make, and once you kind of get into, are able to surrender to the excitement of just, I know that from our conversations in the past that you just really love to learn and you love to create situations where you are engaged in conversation or in the audience of an event that maybe you helped create where you can actually learn something and um, it sounds like that's a big part of your podcast is just setting up an opportunity for someone to share what excites them about what they do and share something that they're really passionate about and give them a chance to articulate, more clearly exactly what it is that they're trying to, the change that they're trying to make in the world.
Yeah, I will take an opportunity to interject here too to give you a second part to that question about, what am I trying to do with this podcast? How did I get started? What's in it for me? I guess, right? I get this question a lot, right? Because I say I'm a host. I'm a podcast host, right? It's not Elizabeth, the business coach. It's the Dear Business Coach podcast, and I have a business degree. And I spent over a decade in sales, right? Just all kinds of sales, inside sales, high pressure sales, rapport building sales, business to business sales. And a lot of that career path, if you will, was really just out of necessity, right? You have to get a job, pay the bills. So sales is important, and I come from a business background, right? So I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with going into sales. I love that industry. There's a lot of great people to work with in that field, but I never really got to explore, an actual path that was intentional beyond just paying the bills. And so the Dear Business Coach podcast kind of started out of frustration too, because I'm hungry to learn from other people and have these conversations with people who are, as I like to say, movers and shakers. What are you doing in your business? Not so much how's it going, but like I just said, what are you working on that you're excited about? My parents, both my mother and my father, come from two very different types of business worlds. My father is what I would call a solopreneur. He had a chain of furniture and mattress stores that he opened every single one himself. And for the most part, if he's not there or directly managing from on a day-to-day basis, the customer, there's no sales. Even if you have an employee or so, you're the one person who makes sure the sales happen. On my mom's side of the family, her family grew a large corporation that I watched grow from the time I was a baby until as an adult. Those folks are retired. That business was sold, and they were considered a small business, but they were servicing international customers. So when you asked me, who is your audience? I get that question a lot too, right? And sometimes I say small business, and the secret to that is that can mean one person, or that can mean technically in the eyes of the government you're considered a small business, but you're actually an international producer. So the takeaway here is that I hear these business stories and struggles around around the dinner table about business journeys from big and small, but either way, it's one person who's working out these ideas in their head about how to go from what I want to be doing to involving other people to make this something productive for all of us. I find it fascinating.
Yeah, I love that. Well, and it's so interesting that so many of the people that come on this podcast uh, become small business owners or start small businesses or become freelancers, creative solopreneurs, what have you, in large part because their journey has begun by trying to solve a problem of their own for themselves, and then that becomes a template for how they can serve other people that will have a similar problem or the same problem, but help them avoid all the mistakes that we make when we're trying to do things completely on our own. So I really love that part of your story. I appreciate you sharing that. So I want to make sure that before we wrap up, that you also talk about this other thing that I know you do, because you and I have had conversations about it. And so you do have an event coming up in our neck of the woods. Elizabeth and I both live in Floyd, Virginia, and tell us a little bit about that aspect of what you're doing and about this upcoming event in particular.
Right. So the other piece of this is last fall, when I started putting out episodes for the Dear Business Coach podcast, I also had this other little thing sitting on paper, right, called an LLC. And it was named Walker Consulting Works. And I came up with that name in terms of business workshops and events, right? So it is an event production company. But hello, that's just me. So I had this little piece of paper sitting over here with the intent to produce events. And as you've been asking me, why do you do what you do? I love people. I love listening to people talk about their business journey, but also their skill sets and what they want to share with people. So I was hoping that at some point I would like to put people on stage, bring, spotlight people who have really cool things to share, but it was just a piece of paper. And so an LLC gives you the right to do business, if you will, but I didn't, that's all it is a name. And then through podcasting, I met a gentleman named Clayton Fletcher. He's a professional comedian based out of New York. You can catch him on stage, on tour, but he is coming to Roanoke because I met him through this podcast. He co-authored a book called The ROI of LOL. Co-authored that with Steve Cody, who's CEO of Peppercom, an international marketing and public relations firm. And Clayton has been doing these workshops for corporations, business groups privately, learn from a professional comedian what to do when your audience isn't with you anymore, when you're giving a presentation, how to read the room, keep your audience engaged. So learn what a professional comedian knows that every business person should know. And I interviewed him about the book, and it turns out he has this workshop available, but not to the public yet. And so here in Roanoke this fall in October, Clayton's coming to Roanoke, and now we get to learn what he knows, what professional comedians know how to do, that business people should know how to do. And now you and I can go to the workshop. We don't have to work for a Fortune 500 company to have access to this workshop.
Yeah, it's really fantastic. I love the whole idea behind it. I'm a big fan of Stephen Pressfield's work. It's really informed my own writing, and he talks a lot about the way that comedians, do their setup and have a premise, their setup and their punchline, and how this is a real template that he uses and that other writers and storytellers in general can use to become more effective at, creating the change that they want to make or the connections that they want to make. So I think this event sounds really fantastic. Elizabeth, I'm going to ask you at some point, when you have a chance, to drop a link in the comments below our conversation so that people can sign up for that. So again, this event is happening in October in the Roanoke, Virginia area. So if you're in Southwestern Virginia or willing to make a trip, this is going to be a really fantastic event. I know the venue very, very well, having performed there myself a time or two. And so I recommend people check out what you're doing. So Elizabeth, as we're kind of wrapping up our conversation, the last question is always something that is going to be repurposed for the email list and for the blog readership. And it's, you are a young person that is starting to make their way in the world, doing your own thing, making a difference that only you can make by leaning into your own creative capacity. And there are people that are tuning in that are either like, at the beginning of that journey like you, or maybe even earlier, where they just had this aspiration that they would love to find some sort of endeavor that they can engage in on their own and, dial in that unique quality or difference only they can make, and put it forth into the world. And then other people that are advancing difference makers who are already doing work out loud and in public, but would love to scale that or optimize that kind of business. So just based on, where you're at in your journey, is there one last piece of advice or one experience or even a quote or exercise, anything that you have to share that would help someone that either aspires to or wants to advance in their own enterprise, do that with a little more prosperity and peace of mind?
Yes. We have about 3.5 minutes. So find a teacher, and it's okay to have a couple of teachers. Right now, I am going to your workshops, to your group calls, your group meetings, and I have to, listen to people who have come before me, right? I think, Scott, that you said to me recently, Elizabeth, I think, in order to achieve success with your event this fall, you kind of need to just do what you already know how to do. Okay, well, immediately I came back to your workshop because I now need you to tell me what that means. So I think we all know what to do, but still partner with a teacher because it helps you find a track. And as you say, Scott, that I'm adopting every day, I think about what's going on this summer to make this event successful for my guests and make the podcast successful for their experience with their episode each time I interview with somebody. What do you actually want to spend your time doing? So I have a lot of questions about marketing and how to be mindful of the dollars that we spend on marketing. But I am finding the most value out of partnering with teachers like yourself who are reminding us to keep focus on the thing that you're actually wanting to do with your time every day. Big help.
Oh, I really appreciate that, Elizabeth. And just the thing that you led with, that is just something I want to highlight for everyone. And this is the dirty little secret about any of us that aspire to make a difference in the world, is we already possess everything that we need in order to make meaningful change for the better happen by leveraging our unique gifts and leveraging our core values and guiding principles. There's really nothing missing. We all have this human capacity to create, to communicate, to collaborate, to connect. And what I love about the way that you're approaching this is you're really leaning into this encouragement that I'm giving you to just engage, conversation by conversation. What marketing really is just human to human connection, communication, and collaboration towards some sort of common purpose. So appreciate your involvement in our community and in the work that we're doing, but really excited to just bear witness to all the things that you're putting forth into the world right now, and always exciting to see people at the beginning of their journey, and just wishing you all the very best. And of course, we want to thank everyone here for tuning in. Elizabeth and I really appreciate the gift of your time and attention. If today's broadcast motivates you to take a bolder step into possibility, then we have done our job. And if you want to keep going with the difference only you can make, and developing that and delivering that out into the world, make sure that you visit creativeonpurpose.com. If you're watching on social media, hit the like button, ask some questions, or share some reflections in the comments. If you're watching or listening as a podcast, give us a 5-star review and leave a text review. It really helps more of the right people connect with and benefit from these conversations. Elizabeth Walker, thank you so much for your time appearing on this podcast and sharing your wisdom and experience with us today.
Thank you so much, Scott.